How many of you have clients of yours who have pretty severe gut health and you've struggled, you've always wondered, like, how do I get them to the next level? Like, that's really what we're going to be covering today.
The idea here is that FMT helps to re-educate a recipient's gut so that it is diverse, it has a large population, and becomes more like a donor. And so the donors are healthy, have a wide diversity and composition of the gut, they live a really healthy life, and this allows kind of to shift that recipient towards a donor and give them a healthy microbiome, which engrafts and becomes stable.
I treated a lot of SIBO, and some patients just do really well avoiding all these fibers, the FODMAPs. But that's not a way of living. Problem is you're missing, in a lot of these cases, microbes that would otherwise help to digest and ferment that.
So if you're looking for what has the biggest bang for your buck if you want to think about your gut health, it's diet. Does it quickly and it has huge impacts.
With autism, we did everything from, improvements in speech to, reduced stimming and tics and hyperactivity and aggression and self-harm.
Today we're going to talk about some interesting things. How many of you have clients of yours who have pretty severe gut health and you've struggled, you've always wondered, like, how do I get them to the next level? Like, that's really what we're going to be covering today. And Dan, I don't know if you're remembering the studies that we showed, especially the mice model where you take obese mice and you exchange the poop of the obese mice with the lean mice. Mm-hmm. And the lean mice become fat and the skinny mice become, the lean mice become fat and the fat mice become skinny when you just through a fecal matter transplant. And we've shared some of the human clinical trials. For those of you who've ever ran your gut test and you find out someone's got C. difficile, you're like, okay, this goes way beyond what we can do in natural therapies, and it can be life-threatening. And so it's like, okay, we just sent him to a GI specialist, and there's one place in Utah that does it. And when I talked to Jason, I was thrilled. I was like, okay, finally we have something that we can offer the community for your clinical application of fecal matter transplant in a way that's safe and effective. Dan, what's your thoughts once you learned about what Jason and Shaina are doing?
Yeah, no, I think I started initially to have some conversation with Jason. Just we still need to follow up, but we get gut's been one of our main areas of treatment at Peak, and we'll find that the hardest cases are the ones that they have the lowest diversity in their gut. They'll be missing, we find if someone is missing over 12 out of 24 of those typical commensal species, probiotics alone and doing these things like short chain fatty acids to really build up that gut and getting some immunoglobulins in there just doesn't quite do it. We've had a couple clients that, they've resorted to creating a mixture and doing an infusion, a rectal, an enema of their own probiotic mix. And it's they really need something with some better diversity, more diversity. And that's part of the big problems with probiotics is we have so many facultative and anaerobic species that we can't get those in a probiotic. And so the only way to get it is try to feed them and seed the gut so they'll grow, or now with Jason, this opportunity to actually put all these species that you can't find in a probiotic, super exciting.
Yeah. Well, great. Well, Jason, Shaina, maybe you guys could give us some kind of the backstory, how you got into this. Jason's a renowned naturopathic physician, ran a busy practice, and now he's just swimming in poop these days. And rightfully so, because he saw such dramatic improvements. But yeah, let's hear some of the backstory from you two.
Sure. Yeah. And Shaina's got a presentation deck to introduce the topic in a little more detail. But about myself, yeah, I first started out treating patients just regular GI issues, IBS, SIBO, IBD. That was sort of my area. Of course, anytime anybody has any one of those types of conditions, it manifests in a whole bunch of other symptoms, whether it's autoimmune or brain fog and so on. And I did that for several years. And then I had a patient actually who reached out to me. Well, a prospective patient reached out, was interested in working with me. But she was one of those, you guys are probably familiar with this, literally tried everything, including, the big guns of going to Mayo and Cleveland and all the integrative, all the functional stuff. And her husband actually sold everything they owned, bought an organic plot of land, built a totally environmentally safe house, grew their own organic food. And still, after years of all of this, she was really ill. And I just said to her, look, I don't think there's anything I can do to help you. But what I think you should do is FMT, because her medical history included just tons of antibiotics. And I didn't know anything about it other than it was a short lecture when I was in naturopathic school. And so she was like, oh my gosh, I'd love to, but there's no way that I can get this. This doesn't exist here in North America. And the only places I could find it would be to go overseas. And given her health, it just wasn't a possibility. And so that started the journey of making FMT more accessible. And so in early 2018, we started treating patients, started out in Mexico, over time expanded to a clinic in Panama, Hungary, Australia. And we had patients traveling from all over the world getting treatment. And then in 2023, we shifted to focusing mostly on just exclusive direct to doctors, clinics, hospitals. And so that's really in line with our goal of expanding access. We realized quickly the hard part's not treating. The hard part's actually the manufacturing, keeping up the licensing, GMP requirements, donor screening, all of those pieces. And so where we're at now is just exclusively providing the product to others. But a lot of what we do is education, really sharing awareness of what this is, how it works, the nuances of it, the importance of what we do, and how doctors and clinics and whatnot can actually amplify the other things that they're doing. I mean, you guys were just talking about peptides, stem cells is another hot topic where the microbiome plays a key role. And so, yeah, we're excited to go through this presentation deck today. And any questions you guys have, I'm here for it.
And Shaina, what's your background?
I have a PhD in neuroscience and left academics and have been working in medical affairs and recently operations in non-traditional medicines since leaving. So I research brain development through birth all the way through aging and different impacts of Alzheimer's drugs and natural resources like food and exercise and how those integrate together to help increase the likelihood of treatment success.
Man, that is awesome. Well, we apologize for the introduction, but I think we appreciate the academic here with us. You'll keep things grounded for us.
And I think we at Novel Biome, part of what we do is try to understand what's happening in the research, what kind of questions are being asked, and how do we layer that with clinical experience so that we can provide the most insight and kind of give everybody the best first step into kind of understanding where FMT would fit into their practice and how does it kind of fit into what they're seeing. So we're trying to take it from as many angles as possible so that we can provide the best insights that we can.
And what got you convinced that FMT or fecal matter transplant was effective?
Yeah, so my master's work actually looked at the impacts of ghrelin, which is a feeding hormone. So there's a lot of those receptors in the memory centers of your brain. And so I looked at how the impacts of altering those receptors impacted memory. And so we know that there's a lot of crosstalk, the whole gut-brain axis exists. And that was a huge kind of eye-opening moment in neuroscience because we looked at the brain as a separate entity. And then when we started learning that there's crosstalk between these two things, now understanding that, leaky gut could impact inflammation, which can lead to changes in the blood-brain barrier. I think there's a lot of neurological conditions that lead with question marks, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, even brain fog and mood disorders. The way that we've been treating them doesn't work, but it may be because we aren't looking at the system as a whole. And that's kind of what led me to kind of leaving and coming into these non-traditional medicines. It was the way that we're asking the questions isn't correct. What part are we missing? And so I think that's something that we're seeing different and an entire shift in the medical field. This idea of integrative and functional medicine is new because we're starting to understand that the body is a whole network and we can't look at it as different systems. And research is slowly changing in that way. And part of it is it's harder to look at a system when you're trying to modulate something small to look at its impact. but you don't really get an answer to the whole question by only looking at that in isolation.
Man, I love that because, yeah, it's the questions we ask that are far more important than the answers we have. And so much of medicine, I think, Jason and I share the same view, is like we ended up departing from Western medicine because they had all the answers. And we're like, we know for a fact you don't have all the answers. So, we departed and studied different types of medicine. And here we are today talking fecal matter transplants. So this is great. Well, I'll let you guys continue. I'll try not to disrupt too much.
And so at the core, the idea of FMT is trying to modulate the gut microbiome. And so everybody's gut microbiome is unique, but the idea here is diversity and composition really matter. And so in a lot of chronic conditions, one of the cornerstones is that the gut microbiome is altered. And often this is a reduction in diversity and overgrowth in specific populations. And so you don't have an entire diverse community. And so we know the gut that plays a role in pathogen protection, making vitamins and neurotransmitters. We know it communicates with the brain. It has a huge role in the immune system. But on top of that, as we've started looking into the gut and how it relates to different conditions, we're learning that the gut is directly connected to way more parts of the body than we ever appreciated. So everyone has kind of heard of the gut-brain axis, but there's a gut-liver axis, there's a gut-muscle axis, there's a gut-bone axis, there's a gut-lung and heart axis. And so what we're learning is the gut is a driving feature in multiple areas of the body and ties back to multiple chronic conditions. And so in some cases, changing your diet and exercise and being aware of your sleep can help restore the gut. But in a chronic sense, and if you've had a chronic condition for a long period of time, bringing the gut back to a balanced, diverse system is difficult, if not impossible, depending on how far things have gone. And so that's where fecal microbiota transplantation, or FMT, comes in. And so the idea here is that FMT helps to re-educate a recipient's gut so that it is diverse, it has a large population, and becomes more like a donor. And so the donors are healthy, have a wide diversity and composition of the gut. They live a really healthy life. And this allows kind of to shift that recipient towards a donor and give them healthy microbiome, which engrafts and becomes stable. And so it becomes their new microbiome. And then over time, you see all the shifts in the ability of the body to kind of function more properly. And then we see this in both GI changes as well as more behavioral and neurological changes as well. All right. So one of the big concerns people have is this safe? And I think that totally makes sense. It's like a little bit concerning when you think of, taking from a donor, taking their stool, and it's extremely purified. One of our products is a powder that you can drink mixed in water. So it's extremely purified. It's so far away from the starting product of stool, but it's understanding that there are a lot of safety concerns. And that's what we do really well, is ensuring that we cover those. So overall in the research and our experience clinically, most of the adverse effects associated with FMT are transient symptoms. So they're mild, they don't last very long, and they resolve on their own without intervention. And they're mostly GI-based discomfort. So abdominal discomfort, diarrhea, bloating, things like that, which is part of the process of kind of shifting the gut as well. And when we look at how do we ensure safety, the two cornerstones of this are donor screening. So ensuring that the donors are highly screened to minimize the possibility of transferring both anything infectious, but also contagious. And so you spoke to this at the beginning, which was like the mouse studies of being able, taking from an obese mouse and giving it to a lean mouse, and that lean mouse becomes obese. And so part of our donor screening process is anything we know from the research that shows that there's some underpinning of the gut microbiome. We screen that out in our donors, both them and their immediate family. Now, we don't know if all of these traits would transfer through this, but our goal is to be more stringent than less. And so we cover things not just metabolic conditions, but as well as cancers, GI issues, neurological conditions, sleep issues. All of those we know have some tie back to the gut. So we screen that out in our donors. And then the other side is manufacturing. And so we manufacture the same as any other pharmaceutical. And I think that should be the standard. This is considered a drug. So the standards should be the same. So we follow good manufacturing practices, which is what all pharmaceuticals have to. We have a third-party oversight with our license with Health Canada. And so this helps ensure that the production and quality of the product is consistent and meets all the same standards as any other pharmaceutical that you would expect.
And can you talk about the donors a little bit? Is there like an age gap? Are you looking for young donors? I mean, antibiotic use, COVID vaccinations, things like that?
Yeah. So our donor screening is quite extensive. So donors go through multiple steps. So the first is an initial health and wellness screening. So this goes through that they're vaginally born, that they were breastfed, that they're all under the age of 30, that they have an omnivorous diet. So we record their diet over a set period of time and evaluate it. We look at limited lifetime use of antibiotics. And so through this, we don't take any donors that have had antibiotics within the last year, and that's our minimum. And almost always it's much more than that. And then they have 5 uses of antibiotics or less in their lifetime. And most of our donors have never used or very, very rarely. Our goal is to try to get the least number. They've never smoked or don't live in a smoking home. They don't have allergies. We account for their travel to ensure they haven't been anywhere that they could pick up an infectious disease. We screen for infectious diseases. Nobody's had any vaccines in the last 12 months. And then, of course, as I mentioned, we look at all the different possible conditions that could transfer, and we screen out for that. So just in the initial screening, only about 1% to 2% of people would even pass that initial screening. We then do blood, stool, and urine screening, and that's repeated every 90 days. And then we do a physical exam with our physician. And then every time they donate, they do a mini screening so that we can ensure that their health status hasn't changed.
Cool. Okay. And, as far as like the ideal candidate, what have you found? So is someone like fit, or does that not, like you're looking at metabolic function, weight, all those things?
In terms of the donors?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we have a cutoff on BMI, as well as we confirm how often they're exercising. So we have a minimum amount per week that they have to exercise to be included.
Beautiful. Were you going to layer in something there, Jason?
Yeah, I mean, you're hitting on the right points. Like, as we age, our microbiome declines as well. We're exposed to more and more, environmental things as we age, which also results in a decline of our gut microbiome. And the standards broadly for donor screening, I think, are weak. There's companies out there that exist that are accepting donors into a program who've had antibiotics as little as 90 days to 6 months before donation. And to me, yeah, you might do testing on them and actually find out they have nothing pathogenic or infectious, but there's no way that the microbiome would have actually had a chance to recover in that time period. So I think this is a really critical piece. Sometimes people say, well, what about a newborn then? But a newborn, wouldn't want to have, how many tubes of blood do we draw each time? 10 to 15 tubes of blood to get all this testing done. So, young kids would not be an ideal donor, but as well, their microbiome's not developed enough. Sure. And so, starting from teenage, typically to like we point out here around that 30-year-old mark is sort of an ideal window. But you're right. I mean, all these lifestyle factors are critical aspects, right? So making sure that they're active, they're not overweight, and all of these things are important to ensure microbiome diversity and overall health.
Love that. Yeah, I used to say my kids had not had any vaccines. They ate like organic their whole life, and they would be ideal donors. They exercise, they're pretty fit. One of my boys is like ultra fit. So these are great.
We got to figure out how to accept donors from around the globe. Right now we're dealing with local donors, but surely there is some ways. It's just complex, especially when we have borders between us.
Yeah. Well, before you know it, like everyone in Go Wellness is going to be sending their poop to you. So Kate says
Right.
put it
Yeah.
in a
As Kate
Ziploc.
said, we'll ship it in a Ziploc. I don't know who it was. It might have been one of you guys, but we were joking about like we need to have like a retreat somewhere, where people can like live their best life and just be donors for us. Right? Like identify these really unique humans and then give them this like retreat experience. Where they're just living to have optimal microbiomes that we're collecting. But
Oh,
that's probably not going to happen. Oh, was that Kate? That was our convoy. Yeah, exactly. That's awesome.
that's great. Beautiful. Thank you.
Um, so if you've heard of FMT, you may have think of it in terms of colonoscopies or enemas. That colonoscopy is kind of the most used administrative method. And most of this is based on the C. diff trials. And so we know that, efficacy rates in C. diff are about 90% with colonoscopy. And then in 2019, we saw the emergence of FMT capsules. And so the exciting part about capsules is in direct comparison to colonoscopy, they have the same efficacy rate. They're much less invasive. They're more preferred by patients. It also allows for an easier route and allows for an easier maintenance period or extended treatment, especially in chronic conditions. And so kind of capsules has allowed a shift both in the research and in clinic how we're applying FMT. So how does FMT actually break down for treatment? So it breaks down into 3 steps. So there's pretreatment or prepping the microbiome for the treatment. There's FMT, and then there's post lifestyle changes to ensure that this new gut microbiome can survive and be healthy and remain diverse and complex because of the lifestyle that is surrounding it. So when we look at pretreatment, most of the pretreatment starts with a course of antibiotics. And so this helps basically to reduce what kind of species are currently maybe overgrown. It reduces the general diversity and the richness within the microbiome. And then it helps to allow for easier and better engraftment of the new bacteria that are going to come in. And we have to think of this as like a competition. And so we want to reduce how much competition there is for the healthy kind of new microbiome coming in. We want to reduce how much competition there is for it to engraft. The easier it engrafts, the more fully it will engraft and the better outcomes you'll see. In part, the other side of this is looking at what type of supplements are people taking and ensuring that they're not antimicrobial, that we try to reduce how many supplements they're taking during this period. And one of the things that we also say is that we don't want to take any probiotics during the FMT treatment. And part of this is because, well, probiotics are really useful while you're taking them. They don't engraft. They could basically signal that there is bacteria there that is not engrafted and that may cause some competition or basically a reduction in how much of the engraftable bacteria would engraft because it'll think that something's there. But as soon as the probiotics removed, because probiotics don't engraft, they're a little bit transient, then you may be missing something in the puzzle because you kind of tricked your body into thinking it was there when it wasn't engrafted. We also look at doing a bowel cleanse, and this is, again, all of the pre-treatment. The idea here is reducing how much competition or how difficult it is for the new microbiome or microbiota to engraft. So by doing a bowel cleanse, you're kind of cleaning out or washing out the system. And then we suggest fasting if possible. And this is going to be dependent on the population you're treating and the patients, but or even just a water fast or a light diet on the day before and the day of FMT, again, to help reduce any issues that may cause with engraftment. Did you want to add anything there, Jason?
Yeah, my take on probiotics is that there's an actual potential that we can develop dysbiosis over time if we're taking probiotics. And so this is not backed by, double-blinded clinical trials and all these things, but I'm ambivalent at best about the benefits of probiotics. And I think at some point they could actually create an imbalance. And our goal is to get that balance. And a lot of these these probiotics just have tons of very limited amount of strains. And yeah, I think there's a potential for a problem there when patients are using them long term. And so our goal at minimum is to not do them during the treatment. And after the treatment, the focus should be more on the diet and fermented foods and other prebiotics that could be beneficial to supporting that healthy microbiome. And so, yeah, I'm not a fan of especially using them during treatment and judiciously after.
Love that. Well, actually, we when I was in school, we tested the probiotics, and so many of the probiotics, what was on the label, we couldn't even identify those phylums. We were like, what? There's nothing in this, and some of them were pathogenic.
I think that goes back to that manufacturing standard and having to meet, and certain things don't have to meet these standards, and they really should, because people trust the labeling and people trust that there would be testing involved, and that's not always the case. And so we see that across the board, and that is changing. But as Jason said, part of the hard part of this is there's so much testing involved in every single stage to ensure that everything we're using meets the standards, and then what we're creating and releasing meet the standards. And so there's an extensive amount of testing, and I'm learning a lot about microbiology that I hadn't envisioned myself learning. But here we are. It's a little bit more every day, but there is a lot of testing, and there should be, to ensure safety, but also that people are getting what they are being told they're getting. As you're building a protocol after pretreatment, you're looking at how exactly are you dosing FMT, and FMT dosing breaks down into two phases: a loading dose or a bolus dose. And the idea here is it's a large dose over 1 to 2 days, and this is going to help with that initial engraftment. So we want to put a lot of bacteria and phyla, different microbiota phyla in there to allow for the best engraftment possible in this initial phase. And then we move into maintenance. And so these are smaller doses over a period of time. And the more chronic or severe what you're treating is, the longer you're going to treat for. And part of this is as I said at the beginning, there's so many systems that play a role within the gut microbiome that in the process of restoring the gut, if something has been chronically dysbiotic, or some kind of relationship between the gut has been kind of out of whack for a long period of time, it's going to take time for that system to reboot and start communicating properly, for the gut to be making the things it needs to be making properly, for the other systems to be connecting properly. And part of this is reducing inflammation, making the right vitamins and neurotransmitters, getting that connection to work properly, tightening up all of the leakiness that's been happening between the gut and the brain. And so this takes time. And so we do talk about extending the maintenance period to kind of meet how chronic the condition has been. And this is where, when we started this, we've been starting to kind of make more tailored protocols to different conditions that we are finding that people are looking into, and basing this on, this is what the research is saying, this is how it's being approached. So it's a starting point to understand, based on this chronic condition, how do you start? And for each one, it's a little bit different. And for each patient, there's a lot of talk. And so one of the things that we suggest during the treatment phase is adding some type of validated or numerical measure to show how change is happening. One of the beauties of people is, once we get better, sometimes we forget how bad we were. Our new normal becomes our baseline. And so by having a validated score or some kind of measurement that you're watching, you can actually see how things are changing, but allows people to also be aware of how they are improving. And so you can look at this in GI, you can look at it cognitively, you can look at mood. There's a lot, and that's something that we help people with when they're working with us, is what's the best validated measure? How often should it be applied? And we're looking at ones that people can do at home and bring with them or send in. And so you have this score to look at the change over time. And we suggest doing that monthly until you start to see a plateau, and then looking into what that plateau kind of what does it mean? Does it mean that, the gut's restored and now you're on to the next thing? Or is it that, there could be something that's interfering with the treatment? And then after you do FMT, the next part of this is actually changing the lifestyle so you're feeding and allowing this to survive. And so the goal here is that in most conditions, once you have a stable gut microbiome and you're treating it well, it will stay there. It will stay healthy. You can keep feeding it. There are some conditions like ulcerative colitis, or we've talked about IBS at the beginning, that there are some cycles to this. And so long-term monitoring is important to make sure that there's nothing impacting the survival of the new microbiome. But when we look at what you need to be aware of, the first is environmental toxins, which kind of happens before you do treatment all the way through, but being aware of what's in your environment and how that could be impacting your gut. But the biggest one is diet. Diet actually accounts for more alterations in the gut microbiome than your genetics. So being aware of what you're eating. And the big thing here is diversity. So you have to eat diversely to have a diverse gut microbiome. You have to feed all the microbiota that are in there. And so by eating diversely and changing and ensuring that you have kind of a consistent wide diet, you're actually able to feed all the different bacteria and friends that are in there. And so we always suggest at least looking at 50 different foods a week to be consistent with diet diversity. And then from there, people kind of keep increasing that to 100 plus different foods a week. And this really does have a really great impact on both the survival of the new microbiome, but as well, just generally, people should be eating more diversely. The other is physical activity. We know that physical activity has a huge impact on the diversity of the gut. And interestingly enough, aerobic exercise seems to have the biggest impact, and it's actually moderate intensity. So too intense doesn't actually give you as much benefits as we think. And aerobic exercise, both neurologically, but as well in your gut, has the biggest impacts for health. So always adding that in and being aware that this is actually not just helping you physically, it's helping you mentally and helping your gut as well. And the other one I don't have listed here is sleep. And it's really simple. Sleeping when it is dark outside, being awake when it is light outside has a huge impact. We know that shifted schedules actually are connected to a lot of chronic conditions. And being aware of that, like actually following that diurnal cycle actually helps a lot of things in your body, but it does have really positive impacts on your gut health.
Yeah, and I would just jump in here too and say, like, this is the huge advantage of talking with an audience that is already doing functional, integrative, holistic type of stuff. These patients are going to typically, I mean, depending on where they're at in the cycle of working with you guys, but they're already going to be doing a lot of these things or going to be encouraged to be doing a lot of these things. And so that, I think, is the real advantage of already having some baseline where they've already done a bunch of work to maximize or improve their health as best as they can with whatever limitations they have. And so adding in the FMT and reseeding and rebuilding the microbiome, they're just going to get to where they want to be much faster than, say, someone that doesn't already have some of these foundational pieces in place, whether it came to having done detoxes or cleanses or other things that would have cleaned up some of the mess that's existing within their physiology. So that's but the big piece here, of course, they're all important, but the diet piece is a really key one. And there's a lot of opinions on the best diets and all these things, but ultimately, I think a really restrictive diet over a long period of time creates problems within the gut microbiome. And so although restrictive diets for a short period of time can have a lot of benefit, long term, I think the key is really diversity. In what you're eating. It's not about like how much necessarily, it's just about getting enough diversity, and having just tracking it out of your own personal interest can be a lot of fun too. But the average American, I think, is eating somewhere between like 10 and 12 different foods. That's it. Because wheat is wheat is wheat, whether it's a pancake or a bagel or a muffin, right? So that's pretty shocking and a real problem. And not a lot of fiber is common in most people's diets. So it's a fun one. I went to a hot pot restaurant yesterday, and I was excited because they literally had like a wall of different foods, and I could just take a little bit of everything. And I probably had 30 different types of foods in one bowl, and it was really cool. But I digress.
Nice.
And a fun fact about diet is diet can actually start shifting your gut microbiome in as little as 24 to 48 hours. So if you're looking for like what has the biggest bang for your buck, if you want to think about your gut health, it's diet. It does it quickly and it has huge impacts. And so we talk about diet a lot. If you get us started, we could talk about
Yeah, I mean, I would like this is obvious, but anything that's like fast food, processed, like all of that stuff's obviously let's remove it. Alcohol is another thing, we just unfortunately it happens to be toxic to the gut microbiome, it has a lot of other fun qualities, but overall it's we got to be thinking about what we're removing as well, as opposed to just what we're adding, because both are important. But if people start adding in more diversity, they're usually cutting out some of the other, less than ideal foods.
Man, well, let's talk a little bit about the different things that you see. Like, let's say someone goes on a carnivore diet. What do you notice in their gut biome, and how quickly does it respond?
Yeah, I don't know that there's any like good research on this, but anecdotally, having seen different people try different things, I think in the short term, they can actually see improvements in their overall microbiome health. And I think a lot of it, even people shifting to a vegan or a vegetarian or like any of these diets, oftentimes what they're doing is they're cutting out a lot of the garbage. And
Yeah,
so a part of doing that is actually they're going to see short-term improvements. I think just over an extended period of time, you are going to be starving off, like even with the carnivore diet, you're going to be starving off certain groups of microbes. And over a short period of time, it's fine. They'll just, the diversity or quantity of them will diminish. But over a really extended period of time, I do think you could totally lose those microbes within your gut, even if you were to then reintroduce some of these fruits and veggies and things, because all of these different microbes, they rely on different fiber sources as a fuel. And so
sure.
over a short term, they're reliant. They're tough. They'll tough it out, but the quantity might go down, but they'll be able to come back. But I think long term, that's the unknown at this point. But
Yeah.
again, there's like anecdotally, I hear people that do these diets, and it's they see significant improvements. But to me, it's like if you have an autoimmune disease and the only way to keep it at bay is by eating only meat, like yes, that's a solution to this fix short term, but it's indicating there's a much bigger issue at play. Like the fact that you can't digest fiber is a problem, and the fact that it creates inflammation is another problem. And so I think it's still a short-term fix to something that is indicating a real underlying issue. And I get it, like as I mentioned at the top of it, it's like I treated a lot of SIBO, and some patients just do really well avoiding all these fibers, the FODMAPs. But that's not a way of living. That's not a way of dealing with this disease. The problem is you're missing in a lot of these cases microbes that would otherwise help to digest and ferment that. It's not just about bacteria being in the wrong place. It's because you have a dysbiosis. There's an imbalance there. And so that community is unhealthy.
Yeah, it's so interesting because, when you're talking about 50 different foods, if you do have some of these infections, you've got SIBO or SIFO, you're going to see patients will feel miserable. Or even like, I had a client who was working with a doctor on mycotoxins, and he's on the 15 foods for a year. And I'm like, I think a year might be a little long for you on this particular diet. Let's talk to your doctor about introducing some more foods, maybe after 3 months, because like to your point, Jason, I've seen it with carnivore diets too. People do really well for like a year, and then all of a sudden their whole metabolic system just starts falling apart. And so, yeah, I appreciate these insights. And as we get into more of the clinical side, I'd love to see, just how this application works for like SIBO, SIFO, and maybe some of the outcomes you guys have seen. But I'll be quiet now. But
These,
by the
these are
way,
great.
one more.
I love the dialogue. I mean, it's this is complex, and the reality is we just don't know everything yet. But just limiting foods is like, if you're just doing an allergy testing and you're removing the foods that are showing elevations with IgG or IgM or IgA or whatever the markers are, like before long, you replace those with other foods, and if you were to retest, those are going to be elevated. So the issue
Totally.
is there's gut permeability and there's problem. So there's something deeper than that. And again, you could see short-term improvements, but over an extended period of time, you're not just going to heal leaky gut by, in some cases, yeah, people are like have real allergic responses to dairy or wheat or whatever the thing is. So I'm not like disputing that reality, but it's like chasing your tail. I mean, you remove a bunch of foods and then you have to remove a bunch more foods. And then eventually the patient's eating nothing except, I've had patients literally, they have to eat their food and they have to blend everything, including meat. I mean, it's like, man, there's something real wrong here.
That's a problem. Well, and what do you guys see with like my endurance athletes? Their guts are horrible. Like my, ultra runners, triathlons, like dudes doing Ironmans, ladies doing Ironmans, like their gut's horrible. So I'm a big advocate of physical activity as well, because just by exercising, you can really do some real wonders for your gut microbiota. But what do you guys see in the overtrainers?
Yeah, it's a similar idea, right? Like their gut permeability. I mean, it's hard on the system, and over that extended period of time, you're actually creating like a leaky gut scenario. And so it's very common even for these endurance athletes to get like, diarrhea after races and things like that. Part of it probably has to do with how much sugar they're consuming during the race, but the other part is they're creating a breakdown of the gut junctions.
Yeah. Yep. Oxidative stress is a real thing. What were you going to say, Shaina?
Yeah, so we see this like from the neuroscience standpoint. As you get into extreme exercise, you actually get negative returns in terms of synaptic plasticity. And so one of the things we love about exercise is it helps the gut, and it enhances basically like how much new neurons your body is making in your brain. But when you get into high-end intense exercise, you actually don't get those benefits. And so there's some point where it becomes so stressful for your body protects itself versus is using that energy to create new things. And so we see that part of this is like you see impasse kind of in multiple places. And so what's the perfect amount? Unknown, of course, because that's how it works. We know when too much is too bad, and we know when too little is too bad. And in between, it's kind of hope for the best and you guess. But we do know that you get negative returns, and it's odd because even in like long distance runners, or when you're doing really high intensity running, low level, mid level, you get really positive benefits, and you get into that high level and you stop seeing those. And so, what exactly is happening is hard to say. And part of what you're talking about, these lifestyle changes, one of the beauties of having this maintenance period is you can slowly add these in, slowly expand the diet as you start seeing changes in the gut microbiome, so that this happens over that period of time and allows for these lifestyle changes. And that's part of the help with this kind of extended treatment, is that all of these lifestyle changes can happen as the person feels ready and is able to, so that they're still getting kind of supplements into the gut throughout that period. So while they're making those changes.
Right.
And then I can go in a little bit about us before we go into the research, which is kind of in the clinical side of things a little bit. We've talked about our manufacturing. So part of it is that because we are GMP and we follow the same standards as pharmaceutical, that puts us in a different thing, and it ensures that our products are consistent, safe, and scalable. And we talked about our donor screening. The only thing we haven't really covered is what kind of products are available. So we have 4 different products. We have 2 lower deliveries like colonoscopy and enema. And then we have our capsules as well as our oral powder. And so this is a patented product that we've created. This was aimed at patients who can't swallow capsules, but for them to have the ability to have something that is taken orally. And so this is a basically colorless, odorless, and tasteless powder that's reconstituted in water, milk, juice, and so that they can take something orally. All of our products are freeze-dried, which allows for easier transport, and long-term storage is in a standard fridge. And it has a 2-year expiration date. So this allows us to transport worldwide, and not worry about having to kind of ship it on dry ice. But as well, when it gets to you, you don't have to have a specialized freezer to store it.
Right.
Yeah, and typically most treatments, especially for adults, would be via oral capsules. The only use case for the lower delivery, from my perspective, although people have varying opinions on this, and you can do whatever you like, but is when there's distal inflammation in the GI tract. Then there's going to be an increased likelihood of benefit from doing a rectal delivery. Colonoscopies are great, but I don't think any of you here are gastroenterologists, and you can't just be doing colonoscopies routinely. And so, but we work with some gastros who, it's their tool, right? It's like you got a hammer, you're going to use it. So they do FMT via colonoscopy, and I think that's still a good option. It really covers the full tract, but an oral delivery via capsules, they're delayed release and tear coated so that it begins opening up in the small bowel. And then of course it'll, make its way south, so to speak. And then the oral powder is really, we developed that because prior to transitioning to what we are now as a contract manufacturer, we treated hundreds of cases of children with autism. And a lot of them, even being 10, 12 years old, still really struggle with swallowing capsules. And we wanted to have a way for them to take it orally, because I think there's a real advantage to inoculating the full digestive tract, not just the distal part of the colon. And even from when I started FMT treatment to when we began incorporating FMT capsules, the outcomes were just significantly better, having that an extended protocol and treating the full length of the digestive tract versus the distal part of the colon.
And do you guys make any suppositories?
No, I've experienced, we've done research and development on all kinds of crazy things, including rectal suppositories, and just didn't work the way we would have liked it to potentially. I mean, ultimately what we were doing is like using extra large capsules, really large capsules. But it's got to get exposure to moisture in order for it to open up in a capsule. And then, just didn't work out. We did some experimenting with it, but rectal enemas, I mean, if you do want to treat the distal part of the colon, do work well. So that's a good option. The key is it's a retention enema. So they're holding it in for like minimum of 4 to 5 hours. We're typically suggesting dosing it at night before bed, so the patient's holding it in overnight.
Oh, wow. That's that can be challenging.
Well, it's only 60 ml, so it's actually not that challenging at all.
Okay. Sorry, I was thinking much higher quantity.
Yeah.
And what did you notice with the autistic kids?
Oh gosh, that's a whole nother webinar. But I mean, broadly, great improvements. I mean, they are at increase. Compared to their neurotypical peers, they have really disadvantages when it comes to their microbiome health. The bulk of the children that we came across had very severe GI issues. And here's some of the research, but overall, great improvements in GI function, and then neurological improvements. Of course, if they were younger, we would see better improvements than compared to if they were older, like adults with autism, although there was still, great benefits there. But we did everything from, improvements in speech to, reduced stimming and tics and hyperactivity and aggression and self-harm, up to kids like who couldn't swing or scooter or bike. Like they learned to be able to do that within a short time of doing FMT, learning to potty train. Like there's some neuromuscular, Shaina was mentioning all these interactions between everything else in the body. Not all kids, of course, experience all of those things. It was really varied. But very phenomenal improvements, especially for a population of children who just don't have a lot of other solutions. There's nothing from an approved drug standpoint that does anything. And of course, all the diet and lifestyle and all those things are great and helpful. But it was really phenomenal to work with those kids. And we still support clinics and such that are predominantly focused on treating this population. And it's great.
And what have you seen with like ADD, ADHD? A lot of our clients, diagnose with that, and they're very successful. But what have you noticed there?
You're just hitting on all of our slides here.
I'm sorry. I'm joking.
No, it's great.
That's good. We can go anywhere.
There it is. Okay, go ahead, Jason.
Well, I'll just talk to what I've seen clinically. I mean, generally speaking, people aren't choosing to do FMT just for ADHD.
Sure.
So it's like, we've seen improvements when they're dealing with some other issue and it's ADHD. And so, yes, there's definitely the potential for benefit in these types of cases. Shaina, you can talk to the slide in a little more detail, but.
Yeah. And so I think one of the things when we're looking younger, these conditions, these neurological conditions that start neurodevelopmentally, one of the interesting things about the gut and the brain is the gut tends to develop before the brain. And some of these, especially we know this in ASD, but it's basically the gut stays underdeveloped. It's not meeting the critical periods that it needs to, and that can impact that crosstalk with the brain. So there's this idea that when the gut isn't developing properly, it isn't sending out the signals it needs to, and things are staying underdeveloped. So both in ADHD and ASD, we do see shifts after FMT in that gut-brain connection, and that's impacted by the amount and the number of neurotransmitters that are being created. So we actually see a shift and an increase in the amount of neurotransmitters the gut is producing. And it's kind of, I think, underappreciated, and literally like these are things that are still coming out, but most of the serotonin your body make is in the gut. So 80 to 90% of the serotonin that your body makes is coming from the gut. The gut's able to make dopamine, norepinephrine, GABA, glutamate. All of these things are being made in the gut. Now, it's not saying that the brain's not making any. Some of these are made more in the brain than the other, but there's some crosstalk and signaling between the two. So if you have one part of the system that's just not making its half, that's going to impact how it's interacting or how much it's being presented in the brain. So we're seeing these neurological conditions where when we see that the gut composition is off, we see that there's GI issues or brain fog associated with, if you have your gut feels off for a couple of days and then you feel really foggy, that's a good indication that something in your gut is not sending out the right signals or it's not building the right things. There's something missing there. But we do see in ADHD that there's improvements in attention, and hyperactivity. It improves the diversity, and we're seeing a shift in that gut-brain connection. And so I think it's an interesting idea, and we're seeing more and more of these neurological conditions and neurodegenerative conditions being highlighted that the gut is playing a role. And I think, you can't undersell it. Like the gut and the brain need each other, and when one is off, the other is. So basically, like how often or where we're seeing research into FMT grows pretty much every day. And so, we see in GI conditions like inflammatory bowel disease, specifically ulcerative colitis, irritable bowel syndrome, SIBO we talked about, but as well Parkinson's, multiple sclerosis, as well as Alzheimer's disease. And metabolic conditions are all areas where we're seeing more research and use of FMT. And then we're also seeing FMT in terms of supporting other treatments. So like cancer, stem cells, as well as in kind of anti-aging, which is by fixing the gut or supporting the gut during these treatments, we're seeing better outcomes. And then,
Cool.
if there's any area you guys specifically want us to cover, I pulled out a couple, but there might be some.
Yeah, cancer would be very interesting. Maybe you could talk about the mechanism there and how it can be supportive.
Yeah. So there's a couple of plots that FMT has been looked at in cancer. One of the really exciting is immune checkpoint inhibitors or immunotherapies. There's been some really cool research basically that taking someone who was a responder to ICIs and doing FMT with their microbiome after their intermission to someone who isn't responding made them responders. And this was kind of the first study looking at kind of modulating the immune system, modulating the gut microbiome through FMT and making someone be able to respond to a cancer treatment. And so we're seeing growth in this area. And that initial study was kind of using someone who did respond and putting it in someone who didn't. But we've seen more clinical studies now that are looking at just restoring the gut microbiome heightens the likelihood that someone will respond to these therapies. The other side is using FMT in kind of reducing side effects, reducing toxicities, and enhancing how well people respond post-treatment, how they're able to recover in oncology. So this is to, radiation and chemotherapy. We're seeing that restoring the gut allows for better better response to treatment, how long people will stay on treatment because it's reducing the side effects, as well as how quickly they recover after treatment. And the other big area is graft versus host disease. So in terms of, stem cell transplants or cell transplants during cancer treatment, we're seeing that this FMT can help reduce or recover after graft versus host complications. And so it's kind of across, and depending on what's happening, we're finding that FMT is helping to kind of alleviate some of those issues in oncology, in the oncology space.
And Shaina's referencing as well, like what's happening during the active phase of cancer treatment, which is very impressive. But what I saw a lot when I was treating patients with FMT is the patients that actually survived cancer. And in some cases, when they were honest enough with themselves, admitted that they actually would have preferred to have just succumbed from it because their life after was horrible. No energy, digestion, a total mess, like real challenges. And so I treated a bunch of these post-cancer patients. They'd survived, but they just had such horrible quality of life. And in some of those cases, it was just transformative, the benefit from rebuilding their microbiome, especially if they've done, like radiation that was anywhere near the microbiome. Like one of these patients had ovarian cancer. So, I mean, she was doing radiation right over the microbiome and it just cooked it.
Yeah.
And she could literally handle no fiber. Any fiber would cause her to have impacted bowels. She had to go to the hospital. And it was just this repetitive cycle where she was just losing weight, real challenges. And very quickly, she bounced back with FMT. So that's another whole area of like, patients have survived things, whether it's cancer, Lyme disease, or any of these treatments that require a lot of fairly intensive therapies that damage the gut microbiome. FMT could be a real play here for them.
That's what it sounds like. How cool.
I think Shaina, it'd be interesting to talk about the stem cell stuff as well. Did you have any of that here in this deck? Oh, here,
Yes.
yeah.
I have everything, always. So much information. I'm a dragon of information. I just hoard it all. So in terms of stem cells, so the, why is that? Hold on, let me pull it up so I can read it here. There we go. So the gut diversity can basically make it more likely for someone to impact or be impacted by different complications to stem cells, as well as gut dysbiosis can impair your immune response. It can make you more likely to be impacted by infections. And then you can have increased inflammation throughout the body. And all of these can negatively impact how well stem cell therapies will work. We talked previously about graft versus host disease, but as well, FMT can help alleviate the impacts of multi-drug resistant organisms, which can be an issue when you're looking at stem cells. Another part to this is that you can, by correcting gut dysbiosis and modulating the immune system, you can enhance the impacts of stem cells. And so here, what kind of the role is that FMT is going to help increase the likelihood of success for stem cells and how many benefits you get and what that outcome looks like. And part of this is by dealing with inflammation and the immune response, but as well as kind of dealing with an area that has a lot of inflammation that isn't working properly before implementing stem cells, so that the stem cells are going to act and do the job where you want them to, and they're not going to be focused on an area of the body that's not kind of where you want the stem cells to be active.
Yeah, and what I've seen too is like if a patient has a lot of GI inflammation and they do the stem cells, well, the stem cells go where the inflammation is. And so if there's an underlying issue that's not a structural one, which is common when people have these GI issues, a lot of these cells are going there and they're not going to other areas where they may be needed even more, like neurologic, the brain, and other tissues that may be damaged. And so what we're starting to see is doctors who are using stem cells are actually pre-treating with some FMT and then doing the stem cells. And so I think there's, it's still early days, but I'm very much expecting that that'll improve outcomes quite significantly when you're combining the two things.
Man, well, especially if you've got, clients who have Parkinson's disease or ALS, some kind of neurodegenerative disease, it seems like that would be just a massive game changer for them.
Right.
Yeah.
And speaking of peptides, I mean, there's again not a lot of data here, but I imagine it's a similar story. You're going to see improved outcomes when you're combining these two things.
Man, love that.
On a note about Parkinson's is one of the most, I think, interesting and kind of highlighted the gut-brain connection, because we learned that, most Parkinson's patients, about 80% of them, have similar GI outcomes about 10 plus years before they show their first, what we would consider traditional Parkinson's symptoms. And so this was something we learned, 15 plus years ago, that basically that there seems to be some kind of gut issue before we would see the traditional presentation of what we consider Parkinson's. So it's one of those interesting areas where FMT is also being looked at, but it is one of the first kind of diseases that we saw a clear connection to the gut leading to some kind of degenerative disease. Another area that I wanted to highlight is kind of FMT in terms of longevity or anti-aging or general wellness. This is an area that we're still kind of learning about. But the interesting thing with longevity is we've looked at this in mouse models, but taking young donor FMT, placing it into an aged mouse, not only improves age-related symptoms like inflammation and muscle and frailty, but it also improves the lifespan. And the opposite is true, taking a donor mouse that is old, putting it into a young, and you see increased aging. And so the gut microbiome, we know, naturally decreases both the diversity and the functionality of the gut, as well as the composition shifts during aging. And that naturally is going to happen. You lose beneficial bacteria, and you increase pro-inflammatory taxa during aging. And it seems like the gut microbiome and an imbalance in it can, impact the immunity, inflammation, frailty, neurodegenerative diseases. We see a big connection, as well as cognitive function. And using FMT to restore the gut microbiome can help not only reduce inflammation and, immunity and support kind of healing the gut microbiome, but it's been consistently shown to help with cognitive decline, issues around frailty, works with other therapies. But the other really interesting thing here is that it plays a role as well as in shifting mood. And that's a big part of aging, kind of that cognitive decline, shifting in mood and frailty are all really big concerns. And so by restoring the gut microbiome, we're consistently seeing that these things are shifting. And so I think that there's a real importance of understanding what that age-related decline looks like and what restoring it would mean in terms of longevity.
Yeah. I think that's where, and Jason and I talked about this. I think getting your gut microbiota, like from an aging perspective, and Jason, you brought up a good point. If we can get the signaling in the body optimized for peptides and for stem cells, everything's going to work better. And that signaling, it starts by downregulating that chronic inflammatory response in the body, which comes from the gut. It's the immune modulation starts in the gut. So I can see some massive benefits there.
Agreed.
All right. And then I have a couple other we can go through. I think the other, because we talked about Parkinson's, we can kind of look at what we're seeing in Parkinson's. And some of these are early. We're just now seeing kind of large scale trials in Parkinson's and MS. But like I said, we know that the gut microbiome is shifted in patients with Parkinson's and tends to come, these kind of chronic, mostly colonic inflammation precedes it by years before we're seeing the Parkinson's based kind of motor symptoms. But these early studies are showing that FMT can help with improvements in both motor and non-motor symptoms of Parkinson's. It reduces the constipation and the GI issues that are shown, but as well as it's both the patients are finding that they feel like their motor and their Parkinson's systems are improving, but also in terms of validated measures, we're seeing these are improving. And it's kind of a similar story with MS. We know that MS patients have a shifted gut microbiome, and that there is an idea here that the imbalance within the gut could contribute to the amount of inflammation and damage experienced in patients with MS. There seems to be some kind of correlation between those two, and that by restoring the gut microbiome with FMT, up to about a year after FMT, we see improvements in the clinical features of MS, and most of those are gait, walking, and balance measures. But this is a long-term change after treatment. And so I think in both of these neurodegenerative disorders, as well as Alzheimer's disease, kind of what we're seeing is that we're able to shift these negative impacts by restoring the gut as well. And so I think
That's amazing. And when you say after a year of treatment, I mean, this would be like daily
so this
oral
was
capsule.
a year after they finished treatment, they were still seeing improvements. And so the initial treatment for most of these, I think, is about 3 to 4 months. And then after that 4 months of treatment, up to a year after, they're still seeing improvements. This is the same. And of course, like these, we'll keep seeing these kind of grow. The downside with longevity or long-term clinical trials is that they'll publish them as they find them. But if this, they may look 3 years. We've got one study that was up to 4 years in ulcerative colitis. There's a 2-year study in ASD, which is showing that basically the improvements that were initially seen after treatment ending are still present years later. And so for autism, they actually see continued improvements over that 2 years. So they are more improved in their behavioral aspects 2 years after treatment than they were at the initial end of treatment. That was after 2 months of treatment. And in ulcerative colitis, we're seeing, let me pull up that study. So while I'm talking, for inflammatory bowel disease, specifically ulcerative colitis seems to have a better response than Crohn's disease does. So these remission rates, that 30 to 40% goes up when you're just looking at ulcerative colitis, and that can range somewhere between 20 and 80%. And again, part of this is now, as we're extending treatment, we're seeing better outcomes. So the initial studies looking in IBD and in ulcerative colitis were very short. And now one of the things that's coming out of the research is we need extended treatment and we need extended monitoring. And so up to 4 years after, we're seeing improvements in ulcerative colitis patients. But one of the things that is noted that every 3 to 4 months, it's important to ensure that they're not slipping into a flare. And if they are, doing a top-up dose seems to reduce the likelihood that they go into that flare. So I think it's really interesting that both in GI-based conditions and neurological conditions, by restoring the gut microbiome, restoring that crosstalk, we're able to bring back some of these issues and kind of reduce the clinical features that we associate with disease. So it's not just GI mitigated, but it also seems that, neurological conditions, and we even see it in some issues in like the liver and the heart. There's studies starting to look at how restoring the gut helps reduce some of those issues as well in other systems.
Man, love that.
All right. Is there anything else you'd want to cover, Jason, before we clue up?
No, I mean, I don't know how you guys are on time here, but if there's questions, that'd be awesome to address any questions.
I think if anyone has any questions, type them into the chat box. This has been super fascinating. Thank you guys so much. I'm curious on the longevity side of things. Have you guys seen any like specific protocols or anything that other clinics are using to roll this out clinically?
So
yeah, I mean, we've summarized some of the research out there, and we've developed a couple protocols. I think we've shared some of them with you guys. We can share all of the ones that we have if you want to push it out to your guys' audience as well. But it varies a lot, frankly. But oftentimes it's typically a 1 to 3 months of treatment that they're doing, basically with this aligned with like a bit of a loading dose and then a little bit of a longer maintenance dose. So that's typically what we're seeing. It just depends, some of these longevity clinics are doing stem cells or peptides or a combination of things. So there's a lot of variability.
Oh yeah.
But, typically the length of treatment is in that 1 to 3 month range. I think it really depends on, does this person or patient have other underlying health issues. So that would also determine like the potential length of treatment. Like if someone's looking to just enhance their health, I mean, not just, that's quite an important thing, but if that's what their motive is and they're otherwise healthy and robust and they don't have a medical history that includes like tons and tons of antibiotics, then probably just a short course, 1-2 months is going to do a lot for them. The downside, so to speak, is often that you won't necessarily see like really huge improvements because this person's already optimized, like they're doing well. Although, there's still people, you just don't know sometimes if you're underperforming until you do something. You're like, wow, actually, I'm feeling more energy, or cognitively, I'm just more focused, or these types of things. And a lot of, I think, in longevity is it's what are we preventing? What types of diseases are we, genetically, have a proclivity for, the family history or other things. What are we actually preventing? And that's something we just don't find out, ideally. If we prevented developing Parkinson's, that would be great. And I think that's the play is really more disease prevention and reducing your risk for some of these otherwise chronic diseases.
Very cool. Yeah, just like thinking about it kind of strategically is, if you did this, even if there's a little minor digestive stuff, you could do this, and then, every few years. I was just wondering if you guys have like developed anything specific on kind of longer term, because I know you have like the loading dose and then typically like a kind of a 6-month protocol, but
I think there's definitely something to it. Like, even Shaina was mentioning with ulcerative colitis, right? Like tracking some of these metrics, biomarkers or whatever it is, in microbiome testing, even to see how the health of the microbiome is going, and then considering sort of like a booster dose as you go. A lot of that's just not been developed yet in the research. Like research is very different, right? They want to do a short of protocol as possible, measure the results and publish it as soon as they can. And because what we were doing predominantly when I was treating patients was treating kids with autism and other neurological and GI issues, we would have people doing sort of booster doses as they would go, depending on the response and a lot of other factors. Sometimes people need to go on an antibiotic, and so that's an obvious reason to do this. You hit 50 and you got to do a colonoscopy and you totally wash things out. Well, there could be an advantage to doing a booster there. So there's different time points where it definitely could make sense. And as we've discussed here, your microbiome just naturally declines with age, and so maybe every year or every 6 months. It's still early to say for sure. But there's the good thing about FMT and improving your microbiome is there's really no downside.
Yeah, and it's nice that there's easier applications now, little simpler.
Right.
I had a few questions come in. Hey Donna, great to have you on here. So she asked, have you noticed any differences in effectiveness in the delivery routes? So between the powder, capsule.
Yeah, that's a great question. It's I was quite confident that when we looked at all of our data and compared oral capsules to oral powder from a maintenance perspective, that we would have seen better outcomes with the capsules compared to the oral powder. We didn't actually notice a difference. And so that was quite interesting. The advantage of the oral capsules is that they're enteric coated and they get through the stomach acid. The oral powder, it doesn't have that advantage. And so actually what we did with the majority of our patients is we'd have them on a PPI, a proton pump inhibitor, to lower the stomach acid in advance of the dose. And they would do that just during the course of the treatment. Of course, none of us here are fans of PPIs, but in the context of sparing some of these bacteria, I think there's real advantages. And over a short period of several months, we have patients doing this stuff for years sometimes. So a few months is not going to create any real problems. So interestingly, no real difference there. I did point out though that when I just got started, we were just doing protocols with enemas. Typically a 10-day course of enemas. And when we started doing the oral treatment with capsules, the results improved significantly. So I think in part, A, we're inoculating the full digestive tract, but B, we're able to create protocols that were much longer. And that, to me, I think is a real key piece, especially for people who are dealing with some pretty significant and chronic issues. It takes some time to like re-educate this immune imbalance. It takes time to heal the gut lining and start to create those longer term shifts, especially in that patient populations that we discussed where they're really limited on the amount of foods and things like that. So it's going to take some time for them to make these diet and lifestyle changes. And that is another advantage of a longer protocol.
Well, Jason, Shaina, you've been amazing. Thanks so much for joining us. And there's the contact info. Providers, novelbiome.com, support at novelbiome.com. You guys have been amazing. Dan, any insights before we wrap up?
The onco aspect was amazing. I hadn't considered because we've used the bifidobacteria because we know that some of the research on those PD-L1 inhibitors or those immune checkpoint inhibitors, but never thought about the FMT for that. And then the stem cells, it's awesome to that connection. Like when Shaina started out, talk about all the gut access with everything, but the oncology was super fascinating to me.
Yeah, we have a white paper as well. So it's a summary of all the research associated with FMT and oncology. So I can send that over to you as well if you want.
That would be awesome.
It dives a little bit more in depth. We have white papers on stem cells as well as oncology. And then we have our own research paper on our results in ASD. And then we've started making these research protocols. And the first part of the protocol is a summary of the research that exists and why the FMT would make sense in that context. So we're trying to, there's a lot of research out there and it's happening so fast. So it's hard for anyone to keep up. And so we're trying to provide resources that allow kind of the fast forward, like how do you get through, on average, most of ours have somewhere between 50 and 150 papers that are summarized in the stuff that we're sending. Wow. And so no one else has time. Some days I don't have time to read all of
time.
Yeah, and keeping up on it. And even we look at in the last 5 years, the number of clinical trials has went from under 50 to over 300. So there's a lot happening. And I think as we're looking at what we're seeing, it makes it make more sense that this is kind of the cornerstone of even just how we metabolize the drugs we're taking. And I think the more that I learn about it, I have a lot of these moments where like, yeah, that totally makes sense, but I didn't think about that. Like the part of your body that breaks down all the food and gives all the rest of your body resources being not working would have bad impacts. But I truly didn't ever think about that until I read it. And I was like, right, that is logical. But sometimes you forget. So like, you take a drug, your body has to take that apart to use it. But if the system that does that isn't working properly, clearly you may not have as good impacts on how you receive that drug or how your body utilizes it because it's unable to do that basic kind of beginning part.
Very cool. Well, thank you guys so much for joining us today. Reach out to these guys if you're interested. I think this is something, especially from optimizing digestive health, or especially if you have those tough cases. This is I think it's a huge breakthrough when you look at what we used to talk about with FMTs and having a blender in the back room, and it just gets a little weird. And now they handle all the blender stuff for you. So that's beautiful. Thank you, Jason and Shaina. You guys were awesome.
This was fun. Thanks for the opportunity. And we look forward to connecting with anyone who wants to geek out on this even more.
Awesome. Love it. We'll see you next time. See you, everybody.